What's up? We back. And it is no longer freezing cold here in Texas, even though it is pretty cold still. Let's see. Well, no, it's not cold. It warmed up a little more. It was 71 degrees. 60 degrees here is like, oh, it's cold outside, right? Like we outside in some jackets and stuff at that point. Uh, but it got terrible here in Texas. And terrible for us is like getting down to 20s. Well, let me clarify because North Texas gets pretty cold weather. Could see some snow. East Texas can kind of get some too, like around New Mexico, El Paso area. They can get a little bit too, mainly going up in some elevation there. But down here, we're on the coast, so we're kind of South Texas, but Houston is right along the coast on the way to South Texas, we could say, but we still consider I consider it South Texas, just not South South. Here we don't get cold like this. It hits 40 maybe in the winter, 1 or 2 days, or it hits 40 in the morning and it's 58, 60 in the in the by lunchtime in the afternoon. But so for us, once it gets much colder than that, we just as people tend to have problems. But this episode, we're gonna dig into the many, many lies that have been told by the Republicans ever since this kicked off, right? And so this has been just so so the podcast started. The whole point of the podcast initially was to call out hypocrisy, which doing that on a weekly basis, it you tend to run out of new current, hypocrisy. But once you start digging into a deeper, historical point of like digging into how history went with this, yeah, sure. But I didn't want to do like a history channel sort of thing. So we kind of started just talking about general politics, what's going on, and kind of looking at hypocrisy from current events. So whenever we get to a point where it is live and in action hypocrisy, oh, I just absolutely love it. I absolutely love it because there's nothing that those particular supporters can necessarily do or say to talk around those points. You just gotta live with it, right? So anyway, before we dig into all of that, I want to touch on a couple things, and then we're gonna end off on the Texas freeze. All right. So first thing I want to talk about real quick is my beloved crypto. So what we have here is basically some ridiculous prices where we have Bitcoin sitting at 58,135. Well, as you see, it's actively moving. This is on coinmarketcap.com, by the way. So you could always go there to check out the latest prices. Ethereum is at 1900. It was at 2000, but now it's at 1900. And Binance Coin has shot up pretty wild. Like you can even see on the chart over here. It's shot up a lot. I think it was at like $40 in December. Now it's at 296. Polkadot's jumped up to 39, and Cardano is at 111, getting ready to cross the all-time high there. So really excited about these top five because I own four of the top five. So obviously do some research before you jump into this stuff. But I've talked about it before, I'm very bullish on Cardano just because of the utility of it. That's just, it's just one of the ones that I think has some actual utility. Polkadot as well. Ethereum is being used broadly, but I think it could be supplanted this year. We'll see. But meanwhile, I'll take them gains. So we're looking forward to seeing where this bull market kind of ends up. Just be mindful when you watch a bunch of videos. If you start researching, they're going to have you believing that this is the thing that's going to make you a millionaire. Be careful. That's called FOMO. Yeah, it's going to be fear of missing out. So you'll have that fear of, oh my God, I got to put $1,000 on this thing, right? Even if you don't have the thousand to bet. And the problem is that whenever you do that, it's just this feeling. You're not basing it on any fundamentals. You're not looking at, is the project a legit project? Will it work? None of that sort of stuff. It's just, I want to see the price go from X to Y. Which, I mean, it's fine. That's kind of how a lot of us get into many of these games, whether it's stocks or, crypto or whatever. We get into it with the desire to make some money, right? Because why else, right? As I mentioned, ADA is the only one that I invest in. I'm looking forward to some gains, but I invest in it because I believe in the tech. But most of them, you're in them because you want those gains. Okay, fair enough. So just be mindful of that and be ready to exit any of those positions, unless you're planning on just like a 10-year hold. Be ready to exit those positions at a certain point. So Bitcoin's at, what did I say, 58 right now, 57. I'm probably going to pull off some profit. We have a lot of room to grow still. Obviously, all the Bitcoins aren't done. They're not all mined. They're not all bought. But at the same time, we're going to have a correction. That's what happens with markets. They go up, down, and sideways. And we've been going up. Bitcoin a month ago was at 28,000. Like, do you think that's healthy? Like in 30 days, doubling, and you're already at 28,000? No, there's going to be a correction at some point. So feel free to set your targets, pull off some profit. Once you pull off your profit, you can just hold that profit. You don't have to pull it off and go spend it on something else. You can, it's up to you, but you pull that profit. Like a simple example, let's say if you bought it at 10,000 and it goes up to 15,000, you can pull the profit off. When it drops back below 10,000, you can buy more, right? But you bought it all with profit. Now you're playing with house money, right? You're no longer betting your own money. So just be mindful of that. Watch out for everybody talking about it's going to the moon and all those. So you'll hear all those phrases if you start digging into crypto. Just be careful. A lot of those channels, they're all about the FOMO. And sometimes they're just driving the price up because they own it. It's like CNBC. You ever watch CNBC and they're on there talking about these stocks? Well, they bring on CEOs and people that have a direct, financial win that they can get if the stock pumps by going on CNBC or if CNBC is talking about something. So it's that same concept. Just be mindful of those things. All right. So one more update real quick. Short bets have dropped substantially since GameStop phenomenon. I'm not going to read this because we do have a lot to get through, but it's just a follow up on our previous episode where we talked about GameStop and everything that was happening there. Now they have learned their lesson. So GameStop took a pretty significant, chunk of their strategy, I guess you could say, in terms of shorting stocks. And now they've kind of learned. They've pulled back a little bit and they're like, you know what? We're not going to short as much as we were, which is a good thing. They learned their lesson. And now they're no longer going to manipulate these stocks in the way that they did. So go back to our previous episode if you want to find out more about the GameStop stuff and why that's relevant. Another one is the global debt soars to 356% of GDP. Now, I tossed this in again, not to read this, but it's important along the same vein of a correction. So the global debt here, we're looking from Q1 of 2013 to Q4 of 2020. And that has just, you can see right here about 2016-ish. It shoots up. We get a little bit of a pullback and then through the roof. Global debt just shot up to 281. and that's 356% of total GDP. So the debt to GDP in this case is what this is talking about. The debt to GDP, as it says, rose to 356% in 2020. A new report from the Institute of International Finance finds it's up 35% from where it stood in 2019, as countries saw their economies shrink and issued an ocean of debt to stay afloat. Now, this is, definitely I suggest digging in. If you're listening to this on the podcast, I'm reading from Axios here. This is something that's important because, again, these roosters are going to come home to roost at some point, right? Like, you can't just keep spending blindly, just like tossing money on the heap, and you're just like, all right, yeah, we got problems, toss some more money on it, right? And now here in America, that was the global, but here in America, Biden is about to, or the Biden administration, they're pushing for 1.9 trillion, potentially over 2 trillion in stimulus for the pandemic. What do you think that's going to do? Like, I mean, eventually we're going to have to cover these debts, right? Like, we can't just keep printing money. As this money flows, the activity, the volatility of the money is what's going to cause the inflation, not necessarily money just being printed, but once they actually get active with that money and spend it and do something with it. If they give out $1 million to everybody and nobody touches, right? Nobody touches that money at all, and it just sits in the savings account. The dollar is not necessarily inflated, not yet, until we start putting that money into the market, right? That's kind of what it means. Well, let's say not savings account, because that does kind of put it in the market, because banks are using your money and they're investing your money while it sits in what you think is your bank account. But let's say everybody stuffed it in a mattress, right? So it's not in the market at all. Those sort of things are going to, or the spending of it is what's going to cause the inflation. So just keep an eye. Again, the stock market is up. I think this week, I think I saw it hit. I think it hit an all-time high, either the S&P or the Dow. So I mean, these things are gonna, like, it's gonna come down. It's going to come down. There's a great video by Patrick Bet David on YouTube. I suggest you go check it out. I didn't pull up the link, but PDB talks about the potential crash, and he talked about this in like 2018 and what it means. He has a video on 8 ways to be prepared, and 10 or 11 reasons why the market may crash, looking at PE ratios, all these sort of things. It's a great video. It's very good information. But the main thing is be ready, right? Don't have some dry powder, as they say, right? Try to stock up as much as you can in cash so that you're ready 3 to 6 months. If you can get a year of cash available, great. But something to where if it takes a turn and you find yourself unemployed, you're not waiting around for the government to give out some cash, because as we see, the government can be relatively inept when it comes to handling those things. So just be ready. Be ready for those things. Last catch up, and then we'll dig into the first topic here. So Merrick Garland, if you remember, Merrick Garland, if you remember, Republicans tried to block him from being, well, not tried, they did, from being a Supreme Court justice. Obama had nominated him the year 2015, and the Republicans said, absolutely not, no, 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 we delay, hold up. And then they waited until we got into 2016, and they said, you're a lame duck president, that's not the way this should work. Lame duck meaning it's your last year in office. And so basically, they basically blocked Merrick from being confirmed. They never even gave him a confirmation hearing at all. They just completely blocked him. And they successfully were able to do that and get new judges in place once Trump won the election. So Merrick may end up getting confirmed as the attorney general, and he says he's going to lead the Capitol riot prosecutions. I only show this, not necessarily to read it here, but I only show this because any story of Merrick getting back at these folk it just warms my heart a little bit, just a little bit, right? Because all the hypocrisy, like I said at the beginning, the hypocrisy. The show started based on hypocrisy, and the idea that he was prevented from being put in a position. He was well qualified, all those sort of things. Now he may be able to come back and not from a I want to get back at them sort of thing, but it does get back at them, indirectly because of their involvement in what happened on January 6th. So it's quite interesting. All right. So I haven't done any Black History content this month. And the reason I didn't is because I didn't want it to be just like the regular old rudimentary, let's just kind of talk about, I don't know, Rosa Parks or MLK and his impact or something like that. All those things are kind of known. But I was holding off on watching a movie recently because I didn't want to dig into it yet. But when it came out, I was like, let me go ahead and watch it. Let me go ahead and check this out because I was concerned about like casting and stuff like that. Like, I've seen a lot about the story. I know a lot about what had happened, and I'm like, this casting, I don't really know, and I didn't want to be disappointed. But I said, you know what? Let me go ahead and watch it. And the movie I'm talking about is Judas and the Black Messiah. If you haven't heard of it, it's the story of Fred Hammond. And I'm sorry, Fred Hammond. Fred Hammond's the gospel singer. Fred Hampton, and the story or the movie is talking about the infiltration of Fred Hampton's crew, being the Judas, and how that kind of brought down ultimately. Well, look, I'm gonna spoil some stuff, right? If you don't know the story of Fred Hampton, there's gonna be some spoilers in here, okay? So if you just skip past this part, if you're watching live, come back later because yeah, I'm gonna provide some more detail on this part here. All right, so the FBI, if you know anything about the Black Panthers, the FBI went through the process of basically infiltrating them and doing whatever they could to stop them. And the reason being is they did not want there to be an uprising of the Panthers, right? They wanted to stop them from, getting any sort of, legit notoriety and really starting a movement here. And now the funny thing about that is the Black Panthers were really what you would consider today like a pro 2A sort of movement that you should have seen, the Republicans of that time actually promoting, right? Because they were utilizing the Second Amendment fully. They're like, look, we have the right to walk these streets with these guns. It is what it is. All of a sudden, here comes some new laws. It's like, oh no, 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 hold up. We need to. Okay, you can have guns, but we need to control some of these things. And the Black Panther Party actually started. It was just a community organization, right? Like think of it like growing out of like Night Watch, right? Like the cops were literally bashing black people's heads in, killing them in the streets, and black folk were like, forget it. We're just gonna start patrolling our own streets, right? And so what they would do is they would watch out and they would make sure that the cops weren't overstepping their bounds. Nothing big. It just kind of started snowballing a little bit and grew. And once it grew, they started things like they had the breakfast program and, I mean, it was just a community organization, right? Like they were really helping the community. Well, the FBI famously infiltrated the Black Panthers, ended up getting people into the ranks and started sowing dissent and getting information, and they started setting up the people who were behind the Black Panthers. Right, then they got some of them successfully in jail, killed others, right? Whole story, right? Now I'm saying this because Fred Hampton was the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panthers. He was not. A lot of the stuff that you hear about Black Panthers was in California, but he was not there. He was dealing with things in Chicago. Well, the FBI at the time found Hampton to be a threat. The term of Black Messiah comes from their paperwork. That's what they were saying. They did not want a Black Messiah to rise up. Now, with Fred, the one thing that I found interesting was his age. Let me see. I have his thing pulled up here. It was 1948 was when he was born, and he died in 69. He was 21. And I didn't realize, like, mentally going through the Fred Hampton story and documentaries and things like that, I didn't realize how young he was. Mind you, Fred had actually spent some time in jail. I don't recall, and he was only 3 years active in terms of, these political speeches and leading the Panthers, those sort of things. So basically at 18, right? What he ended up doing was he spent, I think, 2 years in jail. And while he spent those years in jail, like imagine, like, I mean, from what, like 19 to maybe a year in jail, from like 19 to, maybe 20, 21, he's dealing with jail. And essentially they locked him up. And they did it based on like some ice cream or something. Like they made up something just to get him off the streets because he was starting to grow a movement. Now, you may think that this is just like he was just leading Black people out, right? Because Black Panthers, this sort of thing. No. See, this wasn't like just a pro-Black sort of movement. See, what Fred did and what Fred understood, and this is what drew me to Fred's story initially, was that this was not just Black people who were being disenfranchised like this. There's a scene in the movie, it really brought it to life, where Fred goes and he talks to what you would consider like hillbillies, right? He goes and talks to these folks, and he's telling them like, your kids going to the same crappy schools that our kids are. Your people, y'all having to deal with the same police violence because they're cracking your heads too, right? So he really recognized that this was not necessarily 100% a racial thing. And I've talked about it before. A lot of the things that people call racism and things like that, a lot of times it's classism. A lot of times it's know your place, and you're not in our class. I need you to stay where you are. And he kind of recognized that. So he went to the Young Lords, which was like the Puerto Ricans and things like that, went and talked to them. And so this whole thing ended up becoming what was called the Rainbow Coalition. And that right there is when the FBI ramped it up. Because the problem is, if you can make people believe that the Black people, that are protesting or whatever, they're being snowflakes, or just pick any of the narratives from 2020. They're not disenfranchised. What are you talking about? This is not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. It's just Black people whining, right? You can convince the quote unquote, the hillbilly, the lower class, white folks, if you can convince them that it's just the Black folks doing that, and that you got it better off than them, and you're not whining and, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you can convince them of that and get them to not pay attention to their own situation, then you can control them a little bit more. You can control that situation, them being the Black people who are protesting. But if you start seeing that it's not just an issue that's impacting black people, that it is an issue that is impacting lower class white people, the young lords, the Puerto Ricans, the Hispanics. Like, if you can see truly that the way the system is set up is impacting all of us negatively, and we all need to stand up. Now you're starting to reach out, and what they saw was the potential for Fred Hampton to be the Black Messiah, right? For him to basically bring together this rainbow coalition in a time where those white folks were pretty racist. Let's just be real. He walked into a racist organization meeting and, they didn't want him there. And he was able to talk to them in a way and bring them together. Now, say what you want about, these leaders of today, but when you can speak to a broad base of people and bring them together, you're dangerous. And he was so dangerous that what they ended up doing was getting him locked up. Once he got out, they ended up he got out while he was waiting on his appeal. He was going back to jail because his appeal was denied. Going back to jail, had not broke any laws at that, like, other than the one that they were putting him in jail for, which we'll put that in air quotes. Other than that, he's going back to jail, I think, the next day or the next few days or something like that. That wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. So they raided his house. And they did so by getting the layout from the Judas, right? That's how they ended up raiding the Black Panther Party's office and things like that, right? Now, when they went in there, they shot him up, and they said his pregnant girlfriend at the time, she lived, and so Fred Hampton Jr. is alive today, and he currently runs, I believe, the Black Panther Party in Chicago now. He's the chairman of one of the branches or something to that effect. But anyway, they find him in there. Fred's still alive. They say he's barely alive. He'll make it. He's good and dead now. Like, they literally murdered him in his apartment. And he was about to go right back to jail. There was literally no need for what they did. But they came in and sprayed. Like, just look it up. Like, even beyond the movie, I highly suggest you check out some documentaries about it. Dig into more than just the theatrical side, because the story is infuriating, like, to say the least. It's very, very frustrating. So anyway, I highly suggest checking out Fred Hampton's story and the Rainbow Coalition and the things that he was doing. Feel free to start with the theatrical, though. I thought it was a pretty good movie. Daniel Kaluuya as Fred Hampton, I don't know. That was the casting thing where I was like, I don't know. Didn't really fit. But I thought he did a fine job in the role because he's a great actor. But check it out, and just understand from this. If you get nothing else from this, just understand the people being united is the government's worst fear. It's their worst fear. That's why they sell all of these, narratives and all of these talking points. That's why they do that, because if they don't keep us divided off of these little trivial things, right? Like, oh, I have some melanin in my skin, so I'm different than this other person, right? Or I'm a Democrat, so I'm horrible, or I'm a Republican and I'm horrible. Like, they have to play these things because they need some way to divide us. So you can either keep being divided, or you can be a political free agent. Ding, 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 ding. I need to get my sound effects. Let me see. Can I hit an applause? There you go. I don't have a lot of sound effects set up in this new software, but anyway. All right, so this week, Texas freezes. And the first thing that starts to happen as I jump on and I'm trying to figure out what's happening with the electricity. So of course, anytime something live is happening, uh, I go to Twitter, and I want to see uh, exactly. I want to see like the most up to date, right? Like Twitter seems to be the fastest way to get the news these days. So I jump on Twitter. Um, Mind you, our power's out, so I'm trying to conserve battery. Android, by the way, I mean I can't say nothing about it. Bad, like well, I guess I can say some bad things, but in terms of battery life, off the chain. Like I had the thing on battery saver, and my battery was Gucci. It was solid, and I was able to keep it, basically on with battery saver mode, which stops like background checking of data stuff, things that tend to kill the battery, keeps the screen off, stuff like that. And so I was starting to like look around and check and see like what's happening, what's the latest. And I started seeing these narratives come out. These narratives start talking about uh, what was the failure, and I keep seeing them talking about green energy. I'm like, green energy? Why do they keep talking about green energy? Like green energy is not the problem here, right? Like it can't be. Texas isn't running on green energy. Like we have some, right? Like especially in South Texas, you can see the windmills, stuff like that. Like we have some, but it can't be the issue. So of course, once I start seeing narratives starting to float, I'm like, okay, well that's now it's time for me to dig in, right? And this is my general approach to any current event that's happening. If I see the Democrats starting to push a certain narrative, okay, well, this is a concerted effort to get this particular talking point out. So that means it's time for me to look into the veracity of it, not just share it randomly. I probably should look into this. So I started looking into it, and I actually saw that uh, Governor Abbott had shared some details about it. And Governor Abbott's message here, and let me get this lined up a little bit better. There was a potential, message or narrative out there talking about the power grid being compromised. And so Governor Abbott came out and he said, well, the Texas power grid has not been compromised. And then he said the ability to generate the power has been frozen. This is natural gas and coal generators. Oh, okay, so they're working to get it back on. ERCOT and PUC are prioritizing residential customers. Okay, I mean, cool. No big deal, right? I didn't think much of it. And then Governor Abbott goes on Fox News and, and he says it's a problem with the Green New Deal. I'm like, what? What what are you talking about, Abbott? Like you literally tweeted that coal and natural gas were failing. I'm like, this is not making any sense. And of course, the senators are coming out and they're starting to talk about all this, blah, blah, blah. And so, I start digging in. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at a little bit of it. And let's see what Texas is actually deriving its power from. So Texas, this is an article here from the texastribune.org. It's actually a pretty good publication. I've paid attention to it for a while now, especially when things are happening here in Texas. They're pretty good at their writing, and I haven't necessarily noticed like a particular slant, which is great. That's kind of stuff. That's kind of writing that I want, is writing that doesn't have that slant. So Texas largely relies on natural gas power. It wasn't ready for the extreme cold. So Texas, blah, 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 it relies on natural gas, especially during times of high demand to power the state. Experts say natural gas infrastructure, from pumping it out of the ground to the plants in the city centers, was unprepared for the plunging temperatures brought by the winter storm. So I'll jump down here beyond the winter storm. So here it says ERCOT implemented blackouts on Monday as power plants went offline. This is whenever Texas started to exceed. So you can see the energy capacity, energy used, and the energy capacity. You can see right here on noon, if you look down at the bottom here around noon, right after that, the next tick market, you can kind of see we basically used up all the capacity. And when we did that, they couldn't generate more because equipment was freezing. So they started rolling these blackouts to get the energy below the capacity, the usage below the capacity, which, okay, makes sense, right? They ended up rolling blackouts that turned into complete blackouts. So we went from power cutting off every 30 minutes or so to power pretty much being out, like for days. This, let me actually see who Weber is. I forget his full name. Michael Weber. Here, he's an energy resources professor at the University of Texas at Austin. He says Texas is a gas state. He goes on to say gas is failing in the most spectacular fashion right now. Down here, they clarify that it's estimated that about 80% of the grid's capacity, or 67 gigawatts, could be generated by natural gas, coal, and some nuclear power. Only 7% of ERCOT's forecasted winter capacity, or 6 gigawatts, was expected to come from various wind power sources throughout the state. So when I see this, I'm like, how? They know these numbers. They can get this information. They know what ERCOT was expecting. They know what the plan ERCOT had put together was. So why are they out here talking about it's a Green New Deal thing? Right? And it's crazy to me because it's like, Abbott, you literally just posted, you tweeted that coal and natural gas were failing. So it can't be the fact that, oh, like if, let's just say every single windmill froze. That was 7% of what they expected to use. That was their plan, was to use 7% of the energy would come from these green sources. Okay, we lost 7%. We could have survived that. That wouldn't have been a problem if it was just that. But it wasn't just that. That's my problem with why this ended up blowing up like this, is because what they started doing was just pushing these narratives for the sake of trying to offload, these details or these specifics, specific failures. They started offloading it to these democratic policies, basically. And that right there is just like, why even subscribe to these sort of talking points? And like, I'm having these discussions with people where we're talking about, the failures and this sort of thing. And it's like, what's the point of arguing that this is a Green New Deal issue and this is why we shouldn't go with the Green New Deal? Windmills were first brought into Texas, green energy, I should say, not specifically windmill, but green energy in the 80s. The Green New Deal is like 2 years old, right? And we're not even relying on green energy like that. This is not a thing that we're just completely green as a state, right? There's all these failure points, and you're going to jump over failure point 1, natural gas, 2, coal, 3, nuclear, and you're going to jump to wind and say that's the problem? What? Right? So the thing is that these windmills, like I spoke to people in Belgium. Windmills are working fine. Belgium is pretty cold. Iowa, I believe it was. Iowa windmills are working with negative 20 degrees. We were at plus 20. Some places 10, 8, 10, 12, whatever, but we were not negative on the temperature. So you're telling me windmills can work in Iowa under negative temperatures, but they can't work here with positive temperatures? So that lets me believe, okay, something's wrong here, right? Now, the reason natural gas, I'm not in the oil field. I'm not in the gas industry. I don't have the clear specifics. So I went to people that I know. I was, hey, my oil field experts, like, let me know. Read this article. Let me know the Texas Tribune article. Let me know like what's going on. So I talked to a couple guys, and one of them I went to high school with, good friend, and he's on the Republican side, but he's straight up like, well, the problem is natural gas, the pumps. He talked about several failure points that could happen, and the lines freeze and things like that. But there were things that could be done to prevent freezing, right? That the point is, they could have done what is called winterizing. They could have winterized everything, but they haven't winterized. Because they didn't winterize, we lost power. Once we started losing power, well, what do you think runs the pumps? Electricity. Well, if the electricity can't pull the gas out, which provides electricity, then the pumps can't work to pull the electricity. And you see how we kind of get into this loop right here, right? That ended up being a massive failure. 30% of our, let's say, fossil, uh, you know, energy, the energy provided by fossil fuels, or gas and coal and whatnot, 30% failed. 30% of that failed. And 16% of wind failed. They expected 7% of wind, of our power to be derived from wind. So of that 7%, there's only 7% that they expected. 16% of that failed. So that's less than 1%, or right over 1%. Like, what is that? 1.1, 1 point something, 1.1% or something like that, that actually failed from wind. So 1% of our electricity failed, and you're telling me that that's the reason why our entire grid was offline with millions freezing? It doesn't add up. This is why I say, like, you can't ride with these politicians, man. Like, these politicians are not here for us. If they were here for us, they would have owned their failure, and they would have said, we didn't require winterizing. Governor Abbott now, what do you think he did? He pushed through. Boom. We require these companies to winterize. He didn't say we need to cut back on green. No, he said we need to require winterizing. You can take the talking points all you want. Obviously, I'm not gonna come to you and bring you talking points. I'm just gonna let you know straight up that these particular people, they're lying to you straight up. And since Bruce Banner, love the name, in the chat, brought up electric bills, that's the next article. Thank you for teeing that up, Bruce. Texas officials launch an inquiry into winter storm energy bills spike. Now, this is crazy. Absolutely insane. Again, I'm reading on Axios if you weren't here. I'm just going to jump down a little bit here so you can see this particular tweet by Cat and Tony T on Twitter. Cat and Tony T. Their electricity bill shot to $3,800 for a 1,300 square foot house. They only paid $1,200 for the whole year. The entire year they paid 12, and this month they ended up having to pay, or let's say the current the current bill. I'm assuming this is going to be corrected. The current bill is at $3,800. What? Like, you got to be kidding me. So let's look at the article here. Why it matters. Millions of Texans lost power and water during last week's storms, which I didn't even touch about the water, but we'll talk about that in a second. In the aftermath, wholesale power prices rose from roughly $50 per megawatt hour to $9,000. This was WFAA reporting, uh, noting that some Texans faced bills up to $17,000 so far this month. Now, I saw 13. I didn't know there was one up to 17. I saw somebody with a $13,000 bill. Can you imagine that? That is ridiculous. Power wasn't even on for the whole week. Governor Abbott said in a statement after holding an emergency meeting with the state's Republican and Democratic legislative members, it's unacceptable for Texans who suffer through days in the freezing cold without electricity or heat to now be hit with skyrocketing energy costs. Public Utility Commission of Texas, this is PUCT, the state's utility regulator, announced Saturday that it was opening an investigation into the factors that combined with devastating winter weather to disrupt the flow of power to millions of Texans' homes. So they're looking into it. My expectation is, they're going to address this, right? Like they can't let this go, right? They can't be on the hook, as they say here, for these sort of spikes, right? Like 2020 in a first world country, and this is what we doing. Like we can't have that actually. I, I wouldn't be surprised. Don't count me count it out. But we can't have that. And Cheryl says in the chat that basically rumor has it that they are trying to make the governor look bad. And I think he's looking bad by himself. He's done enough to handle that alone. So Biden has declared a major disaster in Texas after winter storms. This is expected. This is about as much as any president can do. Like, there's really, when it comes to handling natural disasters, I think if you're our age and you lived through Bush and you saw how Bush failed on several natural disasters, you kind of are happy to see that a president jumps out there and does something with a natural disaster. But to be honest, all they really have to do is an emergency declaration. Once they do the emergency declaration, that opens up, federal funding and things like that, so that it can help. They also sent down some generators, things like that, which great. But I mean, really nothing Biden could do here in this case. So back to the power, back to the electric grid. So here on Axio, this is how Texas electricity generation breaks down. So you can see here, this is in 1,000 megawatt hours, and this is quarterly from 2010 to 2020. This is our breakdown of our electricity. And you can see natural gas is the primary, like by a pretty big margin, 69,000 or 69.3 thousand, and 24.7 is coal, 23 is renewables, which they're kind of lumping in all the renewables, and then nuclear is 11. So we had a whole nuclear plant completely shut down just south of Houston, not very far, maybe an hour away, shut down completely. And then, as we already mentioned, the natural gas, they couldn't even pump any more natural gas because they didn't winterize. So the pumps weren't working anymore. So complete failure. As I mentioned, 16% of the wind failed. And then the coal generators, they also weren't winterized. So they failed. And so, again, why are you going to listen to these Republicans that are out? And I mean, it was Abbott, the lieutenant what's his name? Dan Patrick, I believe, the lieutenant governor. He was out on Fox News. Um, Dan Crenshaw, he was out talking about it, and we're going to dig into some of their hypocrisy here in a minute. And then one others, I can't remember. Anyway, yeah. So that's what that's what they doing. That's what they pushing out here. That's what they telling us is the big issue is the Green New Deal. That's the problem. Obviously, right? The Green New Deal. That's the problem. But here was Ted Cruz whenever he was uh, talking about. Actually, hold on. I'm gonna hold off on Ted. Um, let's finish the information here, right? Because it boils down to what are the facts of it, right? This boils down. Then we can laugh at Ted Cruz in a minute. So this is an article by the New York Times. How Texas's power generation fell during the storm in charts. So this is Texas power generation took a hit during the storm. Natural gas was hit the hardest. So if you see here, this chart basically is going from February 11th to February 17th. And you can kind of see how it's essentially 40,000 megawatt hours, this top peak up here. So the y-axis is megawatt hours. So you can kind of see how natural gas is up, down, 15th, big steep plunge here. You can see coal was kind of holding a little bit steady in its generation. And then you kind of see how that dipped down here. And this is nuclear is the purple. Nuclear, you can kind of see how it dipped here, the 15th being Monday. And you can see where it dipped there. Wind, same thing. Up, down. Then you can see where it dipped here. And solar's just kind of been up and down, up and down, up and down in kind of a similar fashion. But you can kind of see here on the 15th where everything kind of took its dive. Now, if we're just looking at this chart, and if we're just looking at this particular area right here from the 15th forward, I guess my highlight's not showing on the screen because I'm only sharing Safari, but that's okay. But from right here, from the 15th, where you see natural gas plunge, which one of these lines do you think plunged the worst? It's not a trick question. It's natural gas. It plunged. That steep drop off right there, that's enough to show you, hands down, yes, these other things losing out as well, they hurt. You can see coal dropping. You can see wind dropping. And nuclear dropping. They all dropped. But what was the big issue here? Natural gas. So while they may come out and they may sound good, right? Like they say it in a way that makes you believe, yeah, that's right. We don't need these Green New Deal and these other sort of plans. We don't need that kind of stuff, right? They make it sound right. But when it boils down to it, that's just not the facts, right? So let's look at one more part here of this same article. I'm not sure if I mentioned, but this is the New York Times. Uh, this is how the power generation compared to the worst case plans. This is what they expected to be used right here. Natural gas, coal, nuclear, and hydroelectric power. You can see this big portion of orangish color. That was what was expected to handle the load. Wind is this little chunk, and you can't even see it, but there is a little bit of a yellow to the right of wind, which is the solar power. On the evening of February 14th, this is what happened. The power usage went through the roof for natural gas, coal, nuclear, and hydroelectric power. Wind increased a little bit here, but we basically got to 67 megawatts. This is from the 14th to the 17th, and you can see how the power generation dipped. So they expected this to be kind of the worst case plan that they expected. And what happened was we required more, and then the generation dipped. So we blew out their worst case plan in terms of usage, and then the generation just wasn't there. We're down to 46 megawatts. It just wasn't enough, right? So leave the political bend out. Like, just drop it. It's irrelevant. It's useless to sit here and try to go through who's at fault in terms of like the which one failed and that sort of thing. It doesn't matter. The failure is clear. This failure was completely about winterizing. That's what it boiled down to. So this is an article here. This is from WFAA. 30 years of warnings to winterize Texas power plants, yet they still froze. Will Austin finally require it? ERCOT, which is not a state, by the way, the R in ERCOT stands for reliability. Kind of didn't meet the need there. ERCOT, which is a state agency, but a nonprofit run by an unelected board, would not release a list of generation facilities that failed. In this article, we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit here. But in this article, they actually went through and talked to some specific power generation companies who actually failed in 2011, because this isn't the first time. 10 years ago, we had power generation failures as well. This particular thing, some of these power plants did not fail. You want to know why they didn't fail in 2021? Because they winterized. Shocker. Shocker. They literally winterized, right? Like, this is, like, just read the article. You can see this is David Worley here. I was trying to find the paragraph. So David Worley of Bryan, Texas Utilities said none of its 4 power generating plants failed during the current winter storm. They had learned lessons in 2011 and did not want to repeat. So what did they do? Ay Dios mío. The company weatherized its units. So I'm not a big government guy. I don't want the government involved overly in like regulating and doing a lot of things. But there's some things that you should be regulating those things, right? We should regulate that. So potentially regulate the power generation. And I just got an alert. The water boil ban is lifted. So now we can drink the water. Well, that was Houston. So we'll wait on Pearland to let us know when it's clear. Here's Abbott telling us natural gas and coal generators are failing. But yet he's on TV telling you it's the Green New Deal. This is why I don't want them doing anything like that, like regulating, because they're going to do these things in a very partisan fashion, right? So before we jump out, we're at time, but you're going to bear with me 5 minutes because we got to talk about Sir Cruz. Ted Cruz on Twitter, at Ted Cruz. Hypocrites, complete and utter hypocrites. And he said, don't forget Mayor Adler, who took a private jet with 8 people to Combo, and while in Combo recorded a video telling Austinites to stay home if you can. This is not a time to relax. This was posted December 2nd, 2020. The reason being is because Mayor Adler told people to stay home. Then they decided to go ahead and take a trip. Same thing happened in California.
It's crazy that we'd be taking a recess. Let's not take any recesses. Let's work. Let's work every day. Let's work weekends. Let's work till we get the job done. Apparently, the majority leader made the decision that it was more important for senators to be home on vacation, home playing golf, home doing anything, but being here on the floor of the Senate doing the people's business.
President Obama, and for that matter, Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party, they're so out of touch with where the American people are right now.
He goes and plays golf hundreds of times with his buddies. He is not focused on the people who are hurting, who are paying the cost. We got a job to do, and we got a short window of time, and so we ought to stop taking recesses, stop taking time off, and just keep going until we get it done. Apparently playing a game of pool is a higher priority for this president than it would be to go and see the humanitarian crisis he's created.
So that was Ted Cruz. The first tweet, December 2nd, 2020. All of that was The Daily Show. They kind of put that montage together, just kind of showing a little bit about, as Bruce Banner says in the chat, Cancun cruise. And what did Ted Cruz do? Ted Cruz decided to take him and his family off to Cancun. Now, his wife is an executive at Goldman Sachs. They're loaded. So of course they can do this. But when you stand on a policy of calling out these folks, you're calling out the Democrats, you're saying that this is, just a failure, a dereliction of duty, and you're mad at Obama for golfing, but you never said anything about Trump golfing way more than Obama in 4 years. You did all those things, and then you decide to take off and get caught. Now he says it was obviously a mistake. So the problem here is Ted Cruz actually initially took off, and he said that he was taking off to just fly his daughters down to make sure that they were safe. He just wanted to make sure that they got there safely. Then he came out and said, "Oh, you know what? I was going to fly back in the morning." But take a look at this picture. Scrolling on the wrong screen. Here we go. Look, does that look like an overnight bag to you? That was the first thing that I noticed. Was when I saw that, I said, that ain't no way he's going for a night. And with that suitcase, what do you need? One pair of pants and one shirt, some drawers, maybe a jacket. Like, that's all you need. You can wear the same shoes. It's an overnight bag. You don't need all this stuff. I was like, well, maybe he had like some work stuff in there. Okay, what, a laptop? Like, what's he doing with this big old bag? So it comes out, and this is what he says. As parents, we have a responsibility to take care of our family, but also have a responsibility that I take very serious in fighting for the state of Texas. Frankly, leaving when so many Texans were hurting didn't feel right, and so I flew back on the first available flight I could take. It was obviously a mistake, and in hindsight, I wouldn't have done it. Right. He said he understood why people were upset, but was suggesting the venom and vitriol on Twitter and media fed into it. It's unfortunate his trip became a distraction from Texan suffering, he added. Earlier on Thursday, Cruz said in a statement that in wanting to be a good dad, he accompanied his daughters on the flight to Mexico for a vacation they wanted to take. But you know what happened? Was the text messages got leaked of their text thread. And let's see, is there anything else in this article before I shut this down? Nah, that's it. So the text messages got leaked from their group text from their private school where they were talking to parents. And on Sunday, I believe it was, Heidi, his wife, started asking if anybody else was interested in going to Cancun. They were thinking about getting away while all this stuff was going on so they could just escape all of the, coldness, right? You're rich. Okay, you want to escape the cold. Fine. A lot of people would do it if they could, right? I don't fault them for that at all. But when you are the person who did all those things that we just had in the video montage, tweeted what you tweeted. You've been bashing all these Democrats for all their failed policies, and then you do this. It's like what they call it, chef's kiss. Oh, I just love it so much. I love it so much because they're hypocrites. It's what it boils down to. They're just hypocrites, right? The last hypocrite we'll talk about real quick. We're not going to get to the last one. Let me clear some of this out here. All right, so Dan Crenshaw, who is a representative here in Texas, he actually had tweeted a while back. This was the mayor relating to mayor of LA. They said it's almost 3 p.m. Turn off your major appliances, set thermostat to 78 degrees, or use a fan instead. Turn off excessive lights and unplug any appliances you're using. We need every Californian to help conserve energy. Please do your part. Hashtag flex alert. Dan Crenshaw, trying to be, a little pithy here, says, Alexa, show me what happens when you let Democrats control energy policy. So, of course, Dan Crenshaw gets dunked on over and over and over because that was September 8th, 2020. And just a few short months later, Texas's power grid fails. So this was what he said with blackouts across Texas. Many are wondering what happened. Leftists are cheering a red state having energy problems. Here's the truth. Now, I'm not even going to go through his tweet because what he did was go through there and start trying to blame green energy in this whole Green New Deal thing, right? But this was my tweet basically to him this was him cheering. He's talking about leftists being happy that a red state was failing, but that's literally what he was doing. That's what Ted Cruz was doing. That's what these folks have been doing. He comes down into this one tweet. He says, bottom line, fossil fuels are the only thing that saved us. They are base load energy. If we were even more reliant on wind turbines that froze, the outages would have been worse. The facts just don't line up with what he's saying. It just don't. They don't. 7% of the wind failed. 16% of the wind failed. 30% of natural failed. What? Like, how do you say that it would be worse? And we're not talking about, the 30% being, basically on scale, 30% of all of that natural failing is 30% of just that natural that bombed. So even if we scale that out, and if all of it was wind and 16% of wind failed, it wouldn't have been worse. It's just numbers. So this was ERCOT who said, this was 9 hours ago, which this tweet was, I believe, on February 16th, 2021. We should be able to restore some customers this afternoon due to additional wind and solar output and additional thermal generation that has told us they expect to become available. But the amount we restore will depend on how much generation is actually able to come online. So this was my tweet. Basically, really, coal failed too, and natural helped us get back energy. Ditch the politics, get real with us. We don't need narratives right now. This is the problem. This is the problem I have. Meanwhile, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they raised $4 million while these Republicans in our state are out here jumping on Fox News to bash green energy. They raised $4 million and they did food distribution and water delivery across the state. Let that sink in. And I'm not the biggest AOC fan, but you can't hate on that. You just can't. Like, I mean, people say, what could Ted Cruz have done? Well, he could have done what AOC did. He could have helped raise $4 million, and he could have went to these places and started helping people get back on their feet. He literally could have done that. but he didn't. Till he got caught. Then he flew back the next day, and then he finally admitted, yeah, I was going to stay the weekend. Hypocrites. Hypocrites abound. The hypocrites are here. I need a bell. Do I have a bell? I don't have a bell. What about this? The hypocrites are here. I gotta beef up my sound effect game. Anyway, stop following these politicians. They're not here for you. They're not here for me. They are here for themselves, and they're just pushing narratives. Become a political free agent. You can join us today. It's free. All you got to do is say, no, there's really nothing to say. Just ditch the extra politicians. Stop paying attention to them. And yeah, like Marcus says in the chat here, the frying pan calling the skillet black. Yeah. Oh, and one other point, because Bruce Banner brought it up. Yes, the daughter's school was not happy because they flew out of the country. Ted had to get a COVID test. When they come back in, they're supposed to quarantine for 14 days. But of course, they're going to want their kids in school, right? So yeah, the school, there's a whole bunch of mess coming from this. Hypocrites abound. We're PFA. Catch us every Sunday, 2 p.m., Tuesday at 7 p.m. Also, hit us up at politicalfreeagents.com. You can find all of our past episodes, well, the majority of them. There's some of them that aren't there, the first 40 or so. I'll get them up eventually. But you can get the majority of the episodes there. Also, subscribe to YouTube. If you're watching now on YouTube, right down here, right down there. Hit the like and the subscribe button down there so you're notified every time we go live. We love to see you join the chat. And also, there's a new tech podcast that we're coming out with called Catapulting. So my company's name is Catapult, and the podcast is going to be mainly about all the tech stuff that I really love to talk about, but I try not to bring too much here unless it relates directly to politics. You'll find new episodes of that coming out in the next week or two. We have the first one recorded. Super excited about that. But you can go check that out on YouTube as well. You can go to catapultmedia.com, and you can find the links to that there. But we're PFA. We're out. Enjoy your day. Stay warm, Texans.